Zombies were moving through your neighborhood, and the lines on the map just became the only thing that matters. You have 48 hours before the ports close and the bridges are blown. Do you stay in your suburban cul-de-sac, or do you have a passport that actually buys you a future? Most people think a bunker in the backyard is the ultimate fix, but in a global outbreak, your country's geography is your real armor. We're ranking the 5 strongest nations for surviving a zombie collapse, from the weakest viable pick to the single best fortress on Earth. For this breakdown, we're assuming a standard viral outbreak that moves fast enough to overwhelm local police in days. By the time we hit number 1, you'll see why the most famous islands aren't actually the safest bet. Here are 5 nations ranked worst to best. Number 5, Japan. You might think an island nation with high-tech infrastructure is a perfect cage for a virus. It's not. Japan's hidden weakness is the sheer crush of its urban centers. Look at the transit maps. If an outbreak starts in Tokyo, the friction of millions of people trying to move through narrow corridors creates a slaughterhouse. Most people assume the ocean provides safety, and while it does stop outside infection, it also prevents internal escape. Japan has some of the highest population densities on the planet, meaning the infection-to-contact ratio is off the charts. Its unfair advantage is its culture of extreme discipline and centralized organization. In a crisis, the population follows protocols that make a drill sergeant jealous. The infrastructure is built for earthquakes and tsunamis, meaning the power grid and water systems are some of the most resilient in the world. But here's the problem. When the food imports stop, and Japan imports over 60% of its calories, the island becomes a clock. If you're stuck in a high-density city like Osaka tonight, your first move is to identify the secondary stairwell and clear the clutter. Don't rely on the elevator. It's a metal coffin the moment the grid fluctuates. Japan ranks 5th because while it's a fortress, it's a crowded one with a short shelf life on food. New Zealand offers more breathing room and handles its own food supply, which is a decisive advantage when global trade halts.
Number 4, New Zealand. People talk about New Zealand like it's the ultimate retreat, and for good reason. It's remote, rugged, and surrounded by thousands of miles of cold water. Most people believe being far away is enough, but distance alone doesn't keep you alive when the local supply chain snaps. New Zealand's unfair advantage is its massive agricultural surplus. They produce enough food to feed 40 million people, yet their population is only 5 million. You won't starve here. The hidden weakness, though, is the lack of a standing heavy military. If a refugee fleet or a stray cargo ship carries the infection to the docks in Auckland, the country lacks the raw manpower to purge an urban outbreak quickly. It's a beautiful place to hide, but a difficult place to defend if the walls are breached from within. The terrain is also a double-edged sword. The Southern Alps provide a fantastic rural fallback, but they also make logistics a nightmare if you need to move fuel or medical supplies between isolated communities. If you're in a remote town here tonight, your immediate play is to secure a reliable source of non-electric water heating. The mountains are cold, and without the grid, hypothermia kills faster than the undead. New Zealand is a better bet than Japan because of the food security, but it lacks the heavy industrial capacity of our next entry. While New Zealand is a maritime fortress, Canada is a continental one, where the weather itself acts as a security force.
Number 3, Canada. Canada is where the environment becomes your primary defense. Most people assume the border with the US is the biggest risk. That's the hidden weakness, the longest undefended border in the world. If the collapse hits the lower 48, millions of people will head north, bringing the infection with them. But Canada's unfair advantage is its size and its winter. A zombie is a biological machine, and machines freeze. In the Canadian North, a zombie becomes a frozen statue for 6 months out of the year. The rural fallback options here are unmatched. You have millions of square miles of forest, freshwater, and game. If you can survive the first winter, you've essentially outlasted the initial wave of the apocalypse. The problem for most people is that they stay in the thin strip of land near the US border, where 90% of Canadians live. If you're in a city like Toronto, you're in a trap. Your move right now is to map out 2 routes that avoid the main highways. In a crisis, those roads become graveyards of stalled cars. Canada ranks higher than New Zealand because it has the industrial base to restart society and the natural resource wealth to be self-sufficient. However, Canada remains connected to a massive landmass with millions of potential vectors. To get truly safe, you have to look back at the islands, specifically the one that sits at number 2 because it removes the land border risk entirely. Canada's land borders are its risk, whereas Iceland's risk is its total lack of trees.
Number 2, Iceland. Iceland is the place everyone wants to be when the world ends. Its unfair advantage is total isolation and a population that's extremely tight-knit. They have their own power via geothermal energy, meaning the lights stay on even if the rest of the world goes dark. You can't drift to Iceland. You have to intentionally sail or fly there, and both of those can be shut down with a single phone call to the Coast Guard. But here's the hidden weakness. Iceland has almost no natural forests or arable land for large-scale grain production. If the global shipping lanes die, Iceland survives on fish and greenhouse vegetables. It's a harsh, volcanic rock that doesn't suffer fools. If you don't know how to maintain a geothermal pump or handle a fishing boat, you're a liability. Most people think they can just show up and live off the land, but there's no land to live off of in the traditional sense. It's a high-tech survival colony, not a homestead. If you're there tonight, your priority is securing a long-term supply of vitamin C and D. Scurvy is a real threat when the fruit ships stop coming. Iceland is nearly perfect, but it's small and resource-limited. It ranks at number 2 because it's a lifeboat, not a continent. For the top spot, you need a place that combines Iceland's isolation with Canada's resources and New Zealand's food. Australia takes the top spot because its massive size allows for internal quarantines that a small island like Iceland simply cannot sustain.
Number 1. Australia. Australia is the world's largest lifeboat. It's an entire continent that functions like an island. Its unfair advantage is the outback filter. While 90% of the population lives on the coast, the interior is a vast, inhospitable barrier that makes it nearly impossible for an infection to spread from city to city. If Sydney falls, Perth doesn't even feel the breeze. The distance between hubs is so vast that the virus would likely burn out in the desert heat before it reached the next major settlement. Australia is a net exporter of energy and food. They have the coal, the gas, and the cattle to run a civilization indefinitely without a single import. The hidden weakness is the bushfires and the water. In a collapse, the fire departments won't be coming. A zombie apocalypse in Australia quickly becomes a fight against the elements. But for a prepared individual, that's a winning trade. You can hide a community in the bush and never be found by a roaming horde. Australia beats Iceland because it has the internal diversity of resources to rebuild an entire military-industrial complex. It has the space to absorb shocks and the geography to quarantine entire states without losing the whole country. If you're in an Australian suburb tonight, your task is to verify your water storage. In that climate, you don't have the luxury of waiting for rain. Australia is the top pick because it's the only place on Earth where you're not just surviving the end of the world, you're positioned to start the next one. Geography is just the first layer of the system. You can move to the outback tomorrow, but if you don't have the mindset to manage the friction of a collapsing world, the dirt won't save you. Real survival is about being the person who makes any spot work. What's the biggest geographic bottleneck in your current town? Tell me in the comments. If you want signal, subscribe. If you want noise, scroll.